Been trying to think with this Norman Malcolm account of Wittgenstein, Sprachspiel for a while, a few years, I guess. The lecture rewards revisiting, and there's some primary puissance in it somehow, and it's even though it's a little bit creaky. So does it say, one point he's making is on Wittgenstein's comments about an order, I have to understand an order before I could carry it out. And then he said this type of way of talking suggests that the order, say, halt, must be understood, and that the understanding is different than the words, or than, in the sense that Wittgenstein says, I understand what Heidegger's doing. He's trying to get to something that's not language, the language. Okay, so all this is totally unclear because somebody could hear the word halt and stop immediately without understanding, just as it, so that could happen, just as we attribute to animals. Crows, for instance, can do this kind of thing. Certain behaviors which are supposed to be signs of them understanding language. I think one wants to say the crow doesn't ask for further clarification about what either the actions which are taken to have a meaning say, or what the words say, but only enacts them, as it were. But somebody who only enacted the word halt, but then when we asked them, what does it mean when someone says halt? And then they couldn't even supply the answer. Well, it means you stop. You're walking, you stop walking. You halt. And they couldn't even supply any kind of clarification, or as it were, saying the same thing. In other words, paraphrasing, saying somehow expanding the thing so that somebody that didn't understand just a halt would understand it, and then at the risk that what they're saying is actually wrong. It's difficult because say the phrase, enjoying the great outdoors is explicated by somebody saying, well, that means that you have to get out in nature. Some assumptions, all kinds of assumptions are made about what the word nature says, which won't do when we're having philosophic conversation, which, however, is a direct conversation about cultural difference. And the phrase cultural difference, of course, even though it's come, as it were, to say something without needing to have anything extra said about it, almost. So well understood is it in so many, it could be said with the connection to example, I suppose. Why does that person stand so close to people? Why doesn't he give them some room? Oh, well, that's a cultural difference. In China, people are used to that or something. Or why is it that person can, as Dugan said of some church man of the Eastern Orthodox Church, not a Russian, somewhere Kazakhstan or someplace, I don't know where it was. I think there are Christians in Kazakhstan, but whatever even if it's an Islamic state, wherever he was, he said this type of this guy's cultural basis. I mean, the guy was some form of Orthodox Christian, but it was of a different ethnicity. It's such that you could almost see him lifting off from the ground when he took another drink. They kept taking, and that he could continuously imbibe spirits, as they're called, which is to say spirits in contradistinction to beer or something weaker, but actually like vodka or something like 40% alcohol, something strong. Is vodka 40% alcohol? No, it's a 40. Is it 80 proof? I don't know why they even used it, confusing thing, proof. I think vodka is 40% alcohol, rather than 40 proof. Or am I crazy? I have to check that. Wine is 13%. Okay. Yeah, so which kind of makes me think. That's funny to forget something like that somehow. All these things sort of like in that case, of course I know what a strong spirit is like when you take one and what the effect is, and I think there's a good scene with that respect in connection to the Dugan's obsession with David Lynch. Actually, the only scene that's really worth seeing in the whole film, the confrontation with Robert Blake. The rest of the movie is it's like kind of adolescent. It's interesting. There's some Adolf Loos type of architecture and things like that, but they're lame. It's they're presented all in a minute in some way that's not. It's not really. We're not talking about like. I think of somebody with a similar grandeur and sophistication of taste, Fassbinder, but with more scope of his own person. His films, of course, lack that thing that we find so amusing somehow in Lynch, of this. I don't know whether it's taking joy in satanic things and making satanic things into something of a sort of paramount joy, and therefore turning it into there's a meditation there, sort of like on something, but it's always seems to be done in a cartoonish and not really serious way. But I do like the scene where Pullman takes 2 shots of some kind of hard alcohol, and then he's got a little buzz. It's like he's not like a lightweight as far as being a drinker. He has just a little buzz, and then he walks over and encounters the Robert Blake, who's apparently Barry Gifford, who's a Berkeley guy, by the way, and who's also annoyed and thoroughgoingly disgusted at Zizek for Did he die recently? I'm not sure, actually. Gifford. But while he was alive, I'm not sure if he's still alive, he did mention at the BAM-PFA, he didn't say it actually, but you could tell just by the way he was so, found it so irrelevant and pesky to be constantly bothered with these Zizek questions in connection to Lynch, because Zizek, characteristically being ignorant of the things he talks about, as he knows absolutely nothing about Dostoevsky, but he likes to quote a certain line in Dostoevsky, and even went to the full trouble of trying to find the actual passage in Brothers Karamazov where the line appears, only to discover that it doesn't actually appear in the form that's mostly quoted, although that's not that interesting in itself, because the substance of it does exist, but Zizek never really has made any serious attempt to understand or to Alcine Andersetzung with Dostoevsky's actually understanding. He just uses these things as props. So likewise, he doesn't really have much any sense of David Lynch, but he kind of, in a stupid way, using these things as props or as gimmicks. Because in the other scene too, the Wild at Heart scene that Zizek likes to explicate with the Willem Dafoe scene, that was a Gifford scene too. And then Zizek enjoys saying, "Oh, this idiot Lynch," and he is an idiot. When asked what was going on in that scene, he had no idea, because he didn't write it. It was written by Gifford. Zizek doesn't know that, so that makes Zizek's commentary boring, because he doesn't really know his stuff. Okay, so you have this question of what's the relationship between the thought and the language, but then the thought and then the language can always be transferred, as Wittgenstein learned, into material objects such as someone giving the finger or something like that, or sign language, of course, I suppose, is somehow very clear sort of Christian stewardization of the so-called ephemeral signs, the so-called alphabet as it appears as somehow on analogy with the notion that a unit in mathematics plays no part in the empirical world, but is absolutely perfect and eternal thing, the unit in mathematics, which then describes the whole numbers, and then which gives mathematics its basis. That this somehow is not at all something that casts a shadow, something like hemoglobin, something like phlogiston, but rather it is not, totally immaterial. So I think one thing we see is, once we give up the notion that the language is something totally different than the rest of being, we have Wittgenstein shows this problem in his Kira, as it were, his turn. Gottfried Benn wrote something interesting on this notion of the mania for early and later stages in the great thinkers and scholars, which came about at a certain time. So it's like, early Wittgenstein didn't get this yet. Later Wittgenstein had been subjected to somebody sort of flipping him off or whatever, and realized that signs are somehow not like the mathematical unit, not totally, and also, of course, that the mathematical unit itself is not that way. It's the same proof. But that whatever coincides with, for instance, sign language, is something, it's not separate from the meaning. So how is this whole thing sort of clarified? It's sort of like what somebody means when they say, I have to understand the order before I can follow it. It means like, it's possible somebody could be shouting like Achtung, Achtung, and then even though it's sort of clear by the intonation and by the sort of outstanding the pronouncement of within the whole posture of the one saying it, that this is somebody is requiring your attention. You're supposed to look. It's clear in a way anyway, I think, even if you don't know the word Achtung, even if you don't know that Achtung means attention. This could be regarded, so the whole thing could be regarded simply, it could be regarded without any sort of linguisticism or whatever, without any linguisticism coming in. But, which is to say, with some kind of claim that language should have the priority over whatever else. So how much is this split, like a real basic split, which gives us orientation, this sort of move between the different examples of so-called language, like things written down in ink, dictionary entries where you have the page, plays on this by the poets who say this lovely emptiness is in the page that hasn't yet been written on, is more open than anything that could be written. So you get this very difficult to navigate with any rigor kind of subject opens up, where Heidegger is able to give a certain rigor to the kind of dropping of old rusty lines, as it were, some of the types of Jesuit style and so on, deep into the bowels of this thing which Heidegger, I think one could say, really, Heidegger says, here's these people who say, like Jung does, it goes on forever. It's not just that. I mean, they just found some fossils in China, where I've heard for a long time that there's, going back to almost 2 million years, fire pits, and fire being a special characteristic of things like us. There's foxes don't, except in their myths, manipulate fire, and neither does any other animal. But they say these that were found were like 300,000 years old, and therefore outside the paradigm of the out of Africa account. Heidegger doesn't say, so he's sort of like, I'm not really one of those like Jung who's going to say there's all these deep time strata going back hundreds and hundreds of thousand years, Maria Gimbutas, etc., etc. And these are affecting the Arignus. He really sort of says, let's go towards Anaximander, who was supposedly the first to raise his eyes, and let's put the Dasein right there. And so Anaximander, this is, in the axial age, more or less, at the foot of the axial age, kind of. So maybe, in a way, Heidegger agrees with his friend Jaspers, Carl Jaspers. The axial age is a special starting point and a breaking point, at which one could look back. I think it is helpful with regard to the sort of divination of the literal sense of words. In other words, the way scholars use the words in a deliberate way rather than the vernacular or koine way. Of course, scholars like the Septuagint took over the koine language and wove it into the Hebrew Bible, and therefore created Judaism in contradistinction to the Yahwehist thing. But yes, there is a lot of terrain problems, as it were, are sort of like places where everything doesn't cohere easily once you start to poke around looking at things that way. But I think that's sort of clear about Heidegger, that no, he's not going to go outside sort of also the area that Strauss mostly deals with, which is basically axial age to ourselves. Beyond that, he would only say whatever's come to us and is still alive in us from, whenever. That would show probably through a phenomenological investigation of the vernacular language. But unlike Wittgenstein, there's not like the Kara in Heidegger doesn't indicate chiefly that he came up. There was a great insight, and then he changed tack. But rather that he had planned to make this turn all along, whereas Wittgenstein tried to produce things in the mode of the analytic philosophers, and then finding that the ontic philosophy was not really sufficient, made his turn into the